Okay, I know. This is like the umpteenth reaction video I've done to a video by Tristan Kuhn. But in my defence, I find his videos quite interesting because he doesn't tackle the standard stereotypical things that you see in a lot of videos when people are like, this is my top 10 something rather to do with Australia. He really puts a lot of thought into what he's talking about, and he tries to look up statistics. He tries to approach it from a standpoint of someone who is trying to verify the things that they're saying, which is very, very refreshing given some of the things you hear from other creators. Admittedly, he doesn't always get it right, but I will give him credit for, I've seen in the past where he's got things wrong in one video and corrected himself down the track in another video when he's admitted that he made a mistake. So he is willing to admit to his mistakes. Like I said, he doesn't always get it right. He was only in Australia for so long, and he obviously was in a particular area in Northern Australia, so that's what he is most familiar with. So there's things about other areas of Australia that he doesn't really know, and he bases a lot of his ideas on just where he was at. But enough of me, let's jump in and have a look at this latest video from Tristan Kuhn, which is looking at differences between Australia and America.
Hey, what's good y'all? Tristan here, and today I'd like to share with you 10 differences between America and Australia. So here we go, 10 differences between America and Australia. Let's get it. Number one, we got these flags on the beach. So if you're an Australian, these are probably very standard to you, but if you're not from Australia, you have no idea what these flags mean. Those flags are, they put two of them up, and that is where you're supposed to swim when you're on the beach here. So if you see those flags, it's safe to swim in between them, but if you don't see those flags, don't get in the water, because there's probably like a rip current or like something that's going to take you out to sea. It's dangerous to swim there, so don't swim when there's no flags.
You know, that is something that is so commonplace in Australia that I hadn't ever thought to question about whether or not it existed in other countries. So it seems to me that he's saying that it doesn't exist in America, although I'm wondering if that's only based on where he lives, because I would have thought that places like Florida and that, where they have super popular beaches, I mean, you see these pictures of people on big tall towers where they're watching swimmers in like places like Florida and that. So is this just his limited understanding of his region in America, or do they genuinely not have these types of flags in America? Now, I need to point out, for anyone who's not from Australia, you're only going to see flags on beaches that are patrolled by lifeguards. They're the more popular beaches in Australia. Smaller beaches are not going to be patrolled. So that means that, yeah, you can swim at those beaches. You're allowed to swim at those beaches, unless of course you're somewhere in the north and there's signage saying don't swim at these beaches, and you probably want to pay attention to that unless you want to be eaten by a crocodile. But the flags are only at the more popular, bigger beaches where there are lifeguards. If you go to a beach that's a little more out of the way, there won't be flags. You can still swim there. But it's a good idea to make sure that there's someone with you probably, or that there are other swimmers there in case you do get into a spot of trouble. Because the undertow at a lot of Australian beaches is nasty. Anyone who's been bowled over and caught up inside a wave at a beach will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not a fun experience. It's certainly a slightly scary experience, and yeah, not something that you want to try every day. But I mean, many, probably the majority of Australian beaches, when you consider how many beaches we have in Australia, aren't necessarily beaches that have lifeguards and flags.
Number 2 is points on license. So here in Australia, there is a point system where, like, if you get a ticket, that ticket might be worth like 1, 2, 3, 4 points. And then once you get enough points, you lose your license. In America, we don't have this point system. So if you, let's say, got 10, 20 speeding tickets in a year, yeah, you'd have a whole lot of fines to pay. But yeah, I don't think you lose your license at any point.
Now, one of my older videos where I do a reaction from the Natasha and Debbie show, when they were actually looking at one of his videos, they point out that, yeah, you can lose demerit points in America for speeding. I think that probably the one thing that is different in America is that they have that thing called traffic school, where if you get a ticket and it's like your first ticket in a 2 year period or something like that, that you can go to traffic school and do like a course that then allows you to get rid of those particular demerit points. But if you've done traffic school within the last 2 years, then you get demerit points. Personally, I'm not a fan of that idea, particularly when you consider that in America they have over 40,000 road deaths a year, and that their road deaths is a representation of 12 people in 100,000 as opposed to Australia's 4 people in 100,000. So, given that America has a significant issue with road deaths, I think they probably need to rethink this traffic school idea.
Number 3 is it is common to drop out of school after year 10 here. So in America, if you drop out of high school, you're considered like a total loser. Like, it is looked down on by everyone. Like, there's no good reason to drop out of high school. No one's gonna hire you. It's gonna be like pretty much impossible to get a good job. Like, you're pretty much gonna have to like be like some super smart entrepreneur, like start your own business and pave your own way for success. Or you're gonna be stuck working a minimum wage job at McDonald's for the rest of your life. There's just not much good alternative to dropping out of school. However, here in Australia, it is actually fairly common to drop out after year 10 and become a tradie or pick up a trade. So if you dropped out at year 10, you would immediately get a job as an apprentice, becoming like an electrician, plumber, chippy, bricklayer, like one of those things, and you're making money like these next couple years while your friends are still in school. On top of that, you're on your way to get certified as an electrician, plumber, carpenter, one of these things, and by the time you're like, I don't know, 19, 20, like still really young, you will be a fully certified electrician, plumber, whatever it is that you're going for. And in Australia, once you get there, you'll be making good money. School is just not for everyone, and here in Australia, they do an amazing job at letting people still have career options in life without forcing them down the school route. Like in America, we pretty much make people like beat their heads against the wall to get them through high school.
Yeah, nah. Sure, you do get people that will drop out of high school at the end of year 10 rather than go on to college. Um, and that is something that I guess has been traditional in Australia for as long as I can think, because years 11 and 12 are kind of considered to be college, so they're not considered to still be high school. They're something different, whereas in America, college is when you go to university. But these days, there's lots of limitations in terms of being able to drop out of school, although it appears to vary from state to state. So in Queensland, which I think where he was based, I believe that legally you are allowed to drop out of school once you turn 16, whereas in some other states it's 17 or 17 and 6 months. But and maybe it is something that is more popular in Queensland. I know that there is definitely shortages these days of tradies, but in terms of getting apprenticeships, you're going to be struggling against someone who has completed more education than you, because there still is that necessity for basics like English and maths, things that are still important for an apprenticeship. So, while I'm not an expert on this, I believe that, first of all, it's not as common as what he's saying. He makes it sound like half the kids in Australia drop out at the end of year 11, year 10, which it's not. Um, I think I know there are some states that do have more dropouts than others, but I think we need to recognise that while it is perhaps more relaxed than the USA, there is still a very, very high value on receiving a full high school education. In other words, in going right through to year 12. But please, if you have more insight on this, please leave a comment below and let me know. Especially, let me know what the rules are in your particular state. I know the rules keep changing as well, which makes it a little bit confusing. Do you think it's as commonplace as what Tristan is saying? Or is it perhaps that commonplace in Queensland? I'd imagine that in somewhere like the Northern Territory, where they're screaming for more tradespeople, that it is quite commonplace for people to drop out of school at the end of year 10 and go to TAFE. Yeah, let me know what you think.
Number 4, you guys love to back into parking spots. So like in America, if you go to a typical parking lot, I'm gonna say like 80%, 90% of the cars are parked like the front of the car into the spot. Here in Australia, I've noticed tons of cars back in, like maybe 50% of the cars will be backed in. In addition, if you've ever seen those parking spots where you like drive on a road and then they're like, the spots are like at like a 60-degree angle, you kind of go in like that. While in Australia, you'd be going down the road and then you back into the spot, and then whenever you want to leave, you just drive forwards out of it. Small difference, but just something weird I've noticed.
Now, this is a somewhat recent phenomenon. It's not something that you would have seen quite so much of 20 something years ago. And I don't know how it has come about like this. So it's interesting that he's saying that that is not really the popular way of doing it in America. Because quite often when new things like this come about in Australia, it's because people are following trends from America. Let's call a spade a spade. But I am going to say a few things about this. I find it to be utterly absurd that people do this whole reversing into spaces thing. It doesn't make sense to me unless it is a space that's easier to get to by reversing into. Sometimes you come across spaces like that. But for the most part, it's far easier to just drive directly into that parking space. And then you have all this room when you leave to reverse out. There's no extra manoeuvring. You just reverse out into the laneway and you drive off. Simple as. And yet you see all these people. And apologies, I know there's probably going to be people on listening to this who do the whole reversing into their parking spots, and they probably have good reasons to. But you see these people with these big SUVs who go into a car park and they're trying to reverse into a parking spot, and it takes them nearly 5 minutes to get into the spot. And then they're sitting on one of the lines because they haven't been able to reverse in straight. Or if they have a little bit of a conscience, they will then spend another 5 minutes trying to straighten up so they're not sitting directly on one of the lines. All this so they can drive out of the parking spot straight ahead when they get back in the car. So at the end of the day, they're actually creating far more work for themselves by spending ages trying to get into a parking spot because they want to reverse in instead of driving in forwards. Whereas people who drive straight in forwards, when they reverse out, they don't have to do that whole manoeuvring crazy shit because they have room to reverse out. Just my thoughts. It's just something that I have trouble understanding.
Number 5 is how they do Halloween and really holidays in general. So in the States, we do it big. We do holidays huge in the States. Whether it's Halloween, whether it's Valentine's Day, whether it's even like St. Patrick's Day, I don't know, Easter. We love to decorate our houses. If you go to a convenience store, grocery store, I don't know, like Kmart, Walmart, any of those stores, there's like at least an entire there's at least an entire section dedicated to that season. In Australia, that section will be about, I don't know, a third the size that it is in America. People, while they're spirited, they like to enjoy the holidays. Like I'm particularly talking about smaller holidays here, not like Christmas and stuff. But they just don't like to. They're not gonna go have as much decorating, do as much for the holiday, not get as much in the spirit. I just say holidays like Halloween, Valentine's Day, Easter. They're just not nearly as celebrated, nearly as big here as they are in the States.
Now, first of all, one observation. I find it fascinating that he's talking there about Easter being something that is, hugely celebrated in the States. And the reason I find it fascinating is because there are so many people in America who are hugely religious. So I would have thought that for them, the focus would have been, like it is for many Australians, in observing Easter as a religious holiday as opposed to a big commercial excuse to go and spend a bucket load of money. So it's fascinating that he's saying that we don't do Easter as much as Americans do. I can understand Valentine's Day and Halloween. We don't have that same sort of culture here in Australia, the majorly commercialised culture that you see around Halloween and Valentine's Day. Sure, people like to give flowers to their significant other on Valentine's Day, maybe buy a card, but it's not something that is so over the top like you see in America. And as for Halloween, well, up until quite recently, we didn't even observe Halloween. Might have, seen it in movies and gone, that looks cool. But, I mean, for people my generation, none of us grew up going trick or treating. These days, maybe in the last 10 years, it is becoming a thing where if a house is going to participate in trick or treating, and usually there's very few houses in an area, then they might put something on their fence to show that they are participating in trick or treating. But even still, it's nothing at all. It's a blip on the radar compared to the way that America celebrates Halloween. And I'm not sure that Australia ever will quite catch up to that whole commercialised Halloween thing, that big craziness that occurs around Halloween in America. Because for many of us, we just don't get it. We just sort of like, yeah, okay, whatever, Halloween. Oh, did we miss it this year? It's not such a big deal here at all.
Number 6 is jail time and incarceration rates. So in America, first of all, I think a lot of people know this, we are like the number 1 most incarcerated country in the world. Like, we have so many people in prison, it's ridiculous. In America, the incarceration rate is around 660 per 100,000, whereas in Australia it's around 220. So 1/3 the amount of people in prison per capita here. But what I've also noticed is the prison sentences, like the length of time you go to prison for certain things, are like way less in Australia than they are in the States.
His statistics there are pretty spot on. And what he was saying about America having a high incarceration rate, they actually rate 6th highest in the world. So apparently the highest country is El Salvador. America rates 6th in the world in terms of the most number of people incarcerated per 100,000. Now, it's true America does have much harsher prison sentences than Australia and the UK. And honestly, sometimes I think Australia and the UK miss the mark. I was having another look at, there was a case in Tasmania, the Amanda Carter case, where she was basically kidnapped by a taxi driver, Wayne Highland, and he did nasty things to her and then killed her. And he got parole after only 8 years, which I found to be utterly mind-blowing. So I think there are times when the Australian justice system really falls short. And I've seen cases in the UK where similar things happen. That said, I have seen instances in America where predators, for want of a better word, have been released from jail and then reoffended and caused the death of somebody. So I think their jail system isn't perfect, but certainly here we do have far lighter custodial sentences than in the UK, than in the USA. We have that whole Westminster system as is. Well, our whole justice system and our legal system is based on the UK's system. So it is understandable that we are probably on par with the UK in terms of sometimes sentences for certain things are a bit of a joke.
Alright, number 7 is something I just recently found out and it blew my mind, but apparently it's common in like big office buildings and like more modern, tall buildings, not like your average building, but like anyways, what it is the elevators here in Australia, you tell the elevator what floor you want to go to before you get into the elevator, and then once you're inside the elevator, there's no buttons. It just like teleports you to the floor that you selected before you got into it. So I don't know, that's kind of cool. I've never seen that in America, but yeah, I saw it for the first time here, and yeah, apparently it's a fairly common thing in like big, nice office buildings around here.
Now, I will admit I don't go on tours of office buildings around the Melbourne CBD, so that would be where I would gain my knowledge from, but I'm pretty certain that it's not as common as what he believes it to be. It seems to me to be a fairly new thing, meaning that it is probably, when you look at the growth in areas like Brisbane, and I think he was in that sort of area, if we're thinking high rises, then probably he is talking about Brisbane. So I'm thinking this relates to much newer buildings, and I'd imagine it's not as common as what he's saying. Like I said, I've never seen anything like that. If you are from one of the bigger city areas, let me know. Is it as common as what Tristan believes?
Number 8 is sports. So in Australia, pretty much all the sports that are popular here aren't popular in America and vice versa. So if you think about it, top 3 sports in Australia are AFL, rugby league, and cricket. Obviously we don't have Australian football in America. We don't really have cricket in America. I've never heard of like an American cricket league. I don't think it exists in America, at least not on a professional level.
So when you come from a country like this, where cricket is pretty much part of our national identity, I just find it mind-blowing to think that a country like America doesn't have professional level cricket competitions. It just seems crazy. But then that said, we're not huge into baseball, and they probably say the same about us. Like, wow, what's wrong with them? They're not crazy over baseball.
And then rugby, like, I've never met a rugby player. I don't know anything about rugby. I know it exists in America. Like, I think we might have an American team, but like, I don't know. I've never seen it on TV. Like, I don't know anything about rugby. I don't think we have it in America. If we do, it's super small. Meanwhile, in America, our big sports are American football, obviously not in Australia. Baseball, not really in Australia. Basketball, which they do have basketball in Australia, but it's not nearly as big as it is in America. Like, it's huge in America. And then you got all the smaller sports, like the Olympic sports, tennis, I don't know, golf, stuff like that. Like, I don't know. obviously, yes, they have them in both countries, but they're not nearly as popular as those three big sports in each country. But hey, if you want to know something that's similar about America and Australia, is soccer is not huge in either of them. I mean, soccer's big in America and it's big in Australia, but I wouldn't say it's a top 3 sport in either country, which is really weird because like around the world, like soccer's like almost the #1 sport like everywhere else. Like it's huge. So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
It's kind of interesting when you think about the difference between what are the most popular sports in the USA as opposed to the most popular sports in Australia. Um, I guess rugby league here probably is up in the top 5 at least, whether it is top 3, quite possibly because I guess you've got the northern states who favour that over AFL.
All right, number 9, this one, guys, this blows my mind. I don't understand it. So that is the homelessness in both countries. So you're probably gonna think I'm gonna say that there's a lot more homeless people in America, and that's what I was gonna say. So I think there are a whole lot more homeless people in America than Australia. You see them all over the streets in America, like they're everywhere. We have homeless shelters that are overflowing. Like there are homeless people on every corner in America. They're everywhere. In Australia, I see so few homeless people. Like you go to like one of the biggest cities, like Sydney, Melbourne, and you walk around the streets, you'll see like probably not even a dozen homeless people, maybe a dozen. Like you just don't see many homeless people. When going to look it up, I expected the homeless population in Australia to be like 1/10 per capita of what it is in America. Like there's so few homeless people here. However, I looked it up because I wanted to get some stats on this, and there's actually way more homeless people in Australia than America. That made no sense to me. In America, there's just over 500,000 homeless people, while in Australia, there's a little over 100,000 homeless people, but the US is like 15 times bigger when it comes to the population. So per capita, there are only 17 homeless people in America per 10,000, while in Australia, it's closer to about 50 homeless people per 10,000. That's like 3 times as much as America, and there's no way this stat can be true. So I looked into it a little bit more, and all I can find is that it looks like the definition of homeless in Australia means not like, not sufficient, I don't know, I'll put it here, not like adequate housing. So you can still have a house, I guess, or a place to live, but if it's not adequate, you're still homeless. So they're just much more strict on what they define a homeless person as. So I couldn't find any good numbers to actually compare, but from my experience, there's way less homeless people in Australia. Like, it's 100% a fact, even though I can't find statistics to back it up.
Okay, so for starters, when it comes to statistics, his statistics are off because he is saying that America has 15 times the population of Australia when it is in fact roughly 10 times the population of Australia. Now, I think that what it comes down to is that in America there is such little recognition of homeless people that chances are, if they do censuses there, and I don't know if they do, but there's probably a lot of people who fall through the gaps when census occurs, so that the figures of homeless in America are extremely underestimated. Because I think if we dug into it more, we would see that definitely there is a far greater problem with homelessness in America than there is in Australia. And that's not saying that there isn't a problem with homelessness in Australia, and it is something that is sadly increasing at a ridiculous rate right now because of the cost of living and the continual rent hikes which are pricing people out of the bottom end of the rental market. But yeah, no, Australia compared to the USA, not even close. I'm pretty certain that if you were to actually take the time to really look at statistics and get your statistics accurate, you would discover that America is still way ahead of Australia.
Number 10, the last one, that is that checkout at hostels or hotels or like Airbnbs, whatever. Typical checkout time in America is 11 a.m. and check-in time is 3 p.m. That's just standard at like 90% of the places you go to. Obviously not all of them. While here in Australia, standard checkout is 10 a.m. and check-in is 2 p.m. So it's an hour earlier.
Okay, so that one just kind of really requires a whatever, doesn't it? I think an hour's difference in check-in and check-out times isn't anything of any great significance at all. So Thanks for taking the time to listen to this video. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you're not already done so. And leave a comment below with your thoughts on the things that I've discussed in this video.